Well, again, so good to be with all of you. Let me see if I do. I'm going to share a screen with you real quick. Something that you have seen. This looks familiar. You were probably working on it this week. And so let's start here. The One Great Person worksheet. And again, this is kind of it's a two-part assignment. You get points, one for doing the interviews of your 10 individuals, but then also the essay that comes kind of analyzing and figuring out what this all means. So again, the worksheet, the beginning part was simply to talk to 10 people and ask them to name someone who is great, and then ask them why. Why makes them a great person in their estimation. We like to do this assignment. It's kind of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. But part of the exercise is to give people a chance to just, it would be different if you talked to 10 people and said, would you give me a definition of what greatness is? You would get a different type of response. And so rather than go to that, that kind of that head knowledge, what do you think greatness is? We go after the heart and say, name a person that you think of as great, because that gives a little bit of insight into what greatness, how they would define it. And you'll hear it because as we go around, I'm sure you heard it in your 10, there's gonna be a wide variety of people who are considered great. And not all of them would be measured as great by the same standard as other people who get mentioned. But as we talk about it amongst the 8 or 9 of us here tonight, you'll hear even a wider variety. So we'll talk a little bit about the different ways that people think of greatness or achievement. What are some of the values that people have behind that kind of question? What is it that we value that that kind of comes out without asking for it when they say someone is great? So let me kick this out and come back to you. Okay, so we've seen the assignment, and you've probably done the assignment. If you need to pull it up so you can see it, I'd like just to hear a few examples of the people that your respondents listed.
I also have a quick question on that. So I work off of a pretty old computer. I was just telling the girls, I just barely was able to somehow hack into the settings and get Zoom to work on this computer. But I ended up writing out that form just by hand to fill it out. Mm-hmm. Can I just send in a scanned picture or?
Yeah, take a picture.
Okay.
Take a picture of your phone or scan it on a computer. Okay. Either way.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I'm not gonna, honestly, if you did the 10 and it's not that much that I see there. I'm really looking more for your essay, but let's start with the basics here of what people responded with. So, but yeah, Shannon, absolutely. Just send me just something. If you can post it on the Moodle, great. If you can't, go ahead and send it to me in email too, but you should be able to post it on the Moodle.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well, Shannon, while I got you on and your mic is working, tell me what was maybe the most surprising answer that you received of the 10 people that you spoke to?
I would say, for some reason, when I got the answer is our president, that seemed to be very surprising to me because I was expecting something totally different. And they weren't referring to our current president. They were referring to
our recent
past president. Yeah. So I think, and the reason being was saying he had said, and he's in his early 20s, but he had said because he's our leader. So that's why I think he's, great. Okay. Well, but that was probably one of the most surprising.
Maybe you should get back to him and ask, well, who's great this week?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
That was probably the most shocking to me. I was like, are you sure? Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm not surprised by that at all. Actually, but it's interesting. It is.
Yeah, it was. And that was the only one that the only answer that I got. That was the only one
Okay.
out of the 10. So
Did you have anybody give the same answer as another one of your respondents? Was there multiple similar answers?
I got two or three. Well, because I got some answers where they would say God and some answers where they would say Jesus. So I would really, I would say that would be the same category. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, but I expected more than 4, but I did not get 4. So, I didn't get more than that. Only 4.
Now, did they ask you what you were doing this for?
Not everybody didn't ask me. No. No. There were a few people who did, and there was also a few people who already knew because they knew the class that I was in. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say, because sometimes that can skew someone's answer. If they know you're taking a Bible class, then the answer becomes God and Jesus.
Right.
Yeah. If they think you're taking a sociology class, then it's Abraham Lincoln or Donald Trump or Kobe Bryant. But if it's a Bible class, it's going to be God or Jesus. That's the right answer, because everyone wants to make sure you're getting the right answer. But that's not surprising. So, okay, good. Somebody else, most surprising answer you got.
Me.
And then if there was one that more than one person responded with.
Okay, I have one. So
okay.
I interviewed some of my students.
Good. How old are they?
They're 5.
Okay.
Okay, so I think one of the most surprising one was I have a student that loves John Wayne, and I was like, oh, so who's the greatest person that you know? So he was like, John Wayne.
Okay.
John Wayne. And I was like, all right, okay. And then I go, why? He was like, oh, because he's amazing. And I'm like, so what has he done for you that is amazing? He's like, he makes me smile. So I was like, okay.
Makes me smile. I like it.
Yeah. So I was like, oh, that's cute. And then I think the most reoccurring one that kept happening was just family members. I didn't say it was a Bible class at all. So it was people, not God. So I didn't know if I can say it was a Bible class, because remember you saying that don't say it. So I mainly got people, not I didn't get God, but
or maybe you just talked to a whole bunch of pagans who don't know about God. So
actually I went to social media and I got around like 20 people responding. Wow. And and then I went to my family members. We have it's called GroupMe, and I went to my family members for that too, and then I went to my students. So I had a wide variety of ages, so I kind of went with that. But it was mainly family members.
Yeah. Any specific family member? I mean, was it like mom?
It was mainly uncles. Or aunts. It was mainly mothers, fathers, maybe a great grandmother, things like that. I got a few teachers too, that family members that said teachers as well, that were in great impact. But I think they were just trying to appease me. Like, oh, teachers,
Of course. Yeah. See, that's the Bible class answer too. It's like, if you're talking to a teacher, you're going to find a teacher who's the great one. So
yeah.
Good. Okay, good. Thank you, Kayla. Somebody else who's not had a chance to share yet.
I'll go.
Go, Melissa.
I think my most surprising one was a tie. I have a friend. He said that Jim Carrey was his great person, and he said that he started off as a nobody. He has a goofy personality, and his wins the audience's heart. He says he's never afraid to talk to any press or fans, and he levels with students, gives graduation speech to let them know that he was just like them once, not famous or whatever. I thought that was pretty cool. Kind of gave me an insight to his personality. I did also ask what characteristics made a great person, and he said that somebody that could be relatable to on many levels. And so that was his. And then my sister said, no one is great.
No one.
She says, for someone to be great, she believes that they need to be compassionate, nice to others, hardworking, have a positive outlook on life, willing to help other people without anything in return. She does not believe that anyone is great, but never really makes it there. She thinks that there are good people out there, but she hasn't come across somebody in her life that was great.
Well, and who said that?
That's my sister.
I was going to say I should introduce her to you, Melissa, but you probably have already been introduced to her. So,
Well, she's kind of fell off the Christian bandwagon. She's going through a phase where she's pagan. So
she sounds hard to please.
I think you're great, Melissa.
Yeah, I agree. I think you're great.
nobody said me. Nobody said me.
Well, we're all going to agree. You are.
I'll say you.
Yes, thank you, Dee.
Oh, my daughter did say
Interview
me.
me.
She says my mom's a hard worker and she makes everything better. So my daughter did say me.
That's the important one. Okay.
I
Good.
say
Okay.
you too.
Yeah, we agree. Okay, good. Somebody else.
I have one.
Okay.
I got Alexander Fleming, who I guess I had never heard of him, and she said that because he discovered penicillin. So I thought that was interesting. And then my sister Melissa is probably worse than what my sister said. Hugh Hefner,
Oh
because
my.
he lived his best life. So I thought that was kind of funny, but not.
That's the person to look up to, Erica. That one right there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, Erica, doesn't that just kind of exemplify just the two you had that you just mentioned? It again, when we try to define what greatness is, someone's going to have completely different grid that puts someone like a historical figure like Alexander Fleming on there with a different historical character, Hugh Hefner, on there.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Right.
Okay, good. Somebody else.
I'll go.
Okay.
I can't even see myself. Okay. For me, the most surprising answer I got came from my 8-year-old son. I was hoping he was gonna say me, but he didn't. He said Martin Luther King Jr.
Oh, okay.
And he
That
said
was
because he fought for equal rights, and my son's inspired by his speech, and he tries to copy everything that he says, but he doesn't quite get it right. So that's who he said. And he also mentioned how the bus, how because of him, African American people can sit up in the front, which I thought that was nice. So yeah, I'm not Martin Luther King Jr., but I thought I was great too.
And we would agree, and I'm sure he does too. But we just had Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. It's been a while since your birthday, so maybe there's a recency bias there.
Yeah. So besides that, I think I got a lot of similar answers. Everyone pretty much said either their mom or their dad.
Okay, so a lot of family members too, similar to what Kayla came across. So, okay, good.
Okay, I'll go.
Yep, thank you, Dee.
Okay, my granddaughter, she's 9, and she says Kamala Harris. She thinks it's great, and asked her why. She said because she's the first woman vice president, African American, and that she admires her.
Awesome.
And so I was just touched my heart when she said that. I thought she was going to say her mom. They're very close. I'm like, oops. But her mom, but my daughter, she said me. Oh, she says because I'm beautiful, strong, loving, a giver, and a great mother and wife. And I have a teenager. He said it's his mom because she's strong and she's a good provider. She provides for him and his brothers, and she works hard.
That's great. Now he's a teenager?
Yes, he's in high school.
That's amazing that a teenager.
First year in high school. Yeah, and
would say that about his mom is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, she just recently was telling us that she put his education in his own hands, and she felt like she taught him enough, and she'd be able to keep his grades up. all A's without her getting on him and reminding him of homework. And so he did that. Yeah. So she's a good mom. She is a good mom.
Awesome. Okay. Is there anyone else out who hasn't shared yet? I know we lost Amanda, so I'm sorry for that.
Yeah. Be okay.
And I'll do the same thing I did last week for her. I will post the recording of this video just in case there's something in what we do tonight that would be helpful for her. So even though she can't be here now, technology will do that when we depend. See, here I go all excited. See, we get to stay at home tonight and do class without having to drive into town. Yeah, and then you have power outage and you can't do class. So that's kind of the way it goes. Is there anybody else, or has everyone had a chance to share? I think that may be us. Okay. Yeah, and I think we heard it all the way through, didn't we? What makes a person great in the minds of those we talk to is going to depend a lot on the kind of things that that person, that individual who you're talking to, views as being important. What are the key things? And of course, there's a little bit of ambiguity with the word great because it does mean different things. You know, it can mean like someone who has achieved the highest level of whatever it is they do. Now, usually, maybe this is a different crowd. Usually I get people who will say things like LeBron James or Kobe Bryant, names like that, you know, kind of celebrity athletes who have stood out and are popular for their athletic ability. Or maybe sometimes you'll get some other celebrity. I mean, we had a few celebrities in the mix there. But again, people who are famous, or sometimes the historical character, you know, someone who makes a discovery or fights for something that changes how the world is, whether it be Alexander Fleming or Martin Luther King Jr., good examples of that as well. But okay, so just to kind of wrap this up, what differences did you see? If you can begin to see a difference, based on the age of your responder, did the children you talked to tend to come up with different types of great ones as opposed to adults, or is it not something you could see?
Different.
How so, Kayla?
A lot of the kids, you can tell, I think because of COVID, that they are inside more and they're watching a lot of TV more. So I got a lot of responsives like John Wayne, Scooby-Doo. I got a lot of like cartoon characters. And then when I went to kind of like my teenage, it was always their best friend. It wasn't necessarily their mom or their dad. It was always normally their best friend. Then when I went to my olders, like my 60s, you know, and 50s around there, they always normally had said their mother or father. Those are the different age groups that I kind of saw differences in. So again, it was like a cartoon character for the little one, then it was like always the best friend for the teenage years, and then for my elderly people, it was always their mother or father normally.
Now be careful with that elderly word there you just threw out there, because I'm in that category. So
my parents are too. So no,
careful. I am too.
Wise owls. I don't
know. Yeah, thank you. Okay.
Sorry. Sorry.
I can be the grandma of the group.
I went blank and I got nervous and I said the word. Sorry.
You did fine. I'm teasing you. Okay, great. But anybody else? That's an interesting observation. I'd be interested to see if others saw the same type of thing in theirs, or if that's just a unique to Kayla's group.
I saw a difference in mine. I have friends that are, well, obviously my sister, but I have other friends that are not Christian. You don't know it, but my husband's Hmong. And so a lot of our friends, he's Christian, but a lot of our friends are not.
That makes so much sense when I look at your last name, Melissa.
Yeah, yes. Yes, so my husband's Hmong, and so he's Christian, his dad's a pastor, but a lot of our friends are not Christian. And I mean, it doesn't matter to us. But I did notice that, like, I interviewed his sister and a couple of teachers that are my kids, because I'm really involved in the school. And they did say, other than Jesus Christ, this is who I would say, or they said Jesus, and then, you know, the people that weren't Christian said things like my sister said nobody, and, you know, Jim Carrey or their dad. I think that those were the differences. I think the comparison that I liked the most was that even though we all came from like this wide age group and this wide variety of diversity of religions, is that we all kind of had these same like 5 to 10 characteristics that made greatness, you know? And so I feel like even though we're so diverse and cultural diverse and religion and all that, society still has this overall bubble of what makes people good, or what makes people great, or what make people be able to work together as a community in this overall little bubble, even though we're very diverse. And I thought that was pretty cool.
You know, it's very cool. And that's exactly what I was hoping you would kind of be able to begin to catch, that you would see their characteristics. And again, not that you would catch that there is a unified set of characteristics, because there may or may not be. It really depends on what people want to agree about. But I'm glad you see that, because part of what we'll talk tonight, or part of what this week is about, is understanding that as, and again, looking mostly at our Old Testament, the idea of how does it depict greatness? And again, what is it there that we are to aspire to? What makes community work better? What are the positives in people that we want to highlight, so that we can, you know, move forward in a positive way together, which is what's kind of at the core of that idea here in the Old Testament, especially. But it really is a question for every culture at every time. You know, what are the things that we value the most, and what are the those personality traits that we want to, again, highlight and aspire to.
Yeah.
Good, that's great. Yeah, one of our assignments this week was looking at the book of Deuteronomy. I forget which assignment it was, but there was a short passage out of the book of Deuteronomy that was a job description, really, for someone who would become king of Israel. Maybe you remember reading through it. And it's an interesting little piece. And why we have you read it is because even though Israel in their history at this time wouldn't have a king now for a couple hundred years, that job description of what kind of characteristics you want to have in the person who rules you was an important kind of grid. Now, maybe you remember that passage. They had to be a member of the community. They shouldn't have too many horses. They shouldn't have too much money. They shouldn't have too many wives. You know, it's kind of an interesting, kind of a funny mix of things. Some of those which make perfect sense, and some of those make no sense to us because we don't live in that time frame. Why these things would be mentioned. But again, it's interesting that even in that, it was like, these are the attributes you want for someone who's going to be great, because you don't want a less than great leader. You want someone who's going to think of the community, who's going to stay close to the law, who's going to you know, respect God and also care for people. And those become the characteristics. Historically, though, as we read about the kings in ancient Israel, we see that most of them didn't live up to that job description very well. Most of them were about getting money or power or prestige. Most of them were about getting lots and lots of wives, because that's more wives the better, right? You know, that's just part of the ancient world. I don't get that one. I have one wife. I'm very happy with that one wife. I don't need to have a whole lots and lots of wives. I don't get what Solomon was up to or after, but anyway. But we see that none of them really did that very well. but it's interesting that while the Bible paints a picture of these great leaders of the Israel's history, it starts off with that job description that they don't live up to, as if all of these great leaders were flawed, and we're able to see that. The Bible doesn't try to whitewash that, but it gives us a kind of an honest look at humanity, and I think very, very interesting the way that it does that. So we'll look at one of those examples in a moment. But before we do, let me just say, we're about halfway, we're moving into this middle section of the class. And so we've been walking through, that one I want to share. We've been walking through the Old Testament a lot. And I know most of us aren't real familiar with the Old Testament. And so I just want to just do this. I like doing this when we're in class together. And can I do this? Yeah, from slide. If you were to look at the books of the Old Testament, there are 39 of them. And so there's a whole lot. But as you've seen from our beginning, the first 5 books of the Old Testament, sometimes we refer to this as the Pentateuch, which is simply the Latin for first 5 books. Not really very clever or creative, but it sounds really smart because, you know, you're throwing language in there. Sometimes it's referred to as the Torah. A Jewish person would refer to it as the Torah because it contains those sections of the law. And so often we refer to these first 5 books as the law, but they're more than law. Really, the law only comes a little bit in Exodus and a little bit in Leviticus. But that's where the law codes are found. But there's a lot of ancient stories in this part here. So that's also where we began our class with the ancient story. The second section of the Old Testament, again, you won't find a Bible that breaks it up into sections, but I think it's helpful for us to understand how it's put together. These are books we refer to as the historical books. These are, if you're going to read stories about some of the Old Testament characters, say the prophets like Elijah or the kings like Solomon, you'll find that they're going to be in these sections here, because this is where the historical stories, other than the book of Genesis, where those historical stories come from, including stories about King David. We'll get talking about David in a moment here, but you'll find him in those books of 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and such. And then the next section, there's a third section, if you want to call it a section, loosely called, and this would be the section we refer to as the poetry and wisdom literature. In here, you'll find the book of Job, Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. And that's a different set. And each of those books has kind of a different set of rules. They are combined together or associated with each other, but they're not really the same. Whereas all the books of history are all narrative in nature, all of these are not narrative. Job is has a very poetic structure. Psalms are often very poetic individually, not as a group, but individually. Books of Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Solomon. We'll be talking about those next week as we get into the wisdom literature. It's different. And then the last part of the Old Testament, again, this is where we're least familiar, but it is a big part of it. You can see there's more books in this section than any other section, and yet these are the books we refer to as the prophets. These are not necessarily future tellers. And again, we'll talk more next week about what the prophet's role was. There's a little bit of future events that they spoke about that then later came to be. But more than anything, they were the ones who were calling Israel back to faithfulness in God. And so with that larger section, some of these books are long, for example, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, and some are very short, only 3, 4, 5 chapters long, like Nahum or Micah, and some of the other smaller books that are there towards the end. But that's how it's kind of categorized. If you were looking at a library that had all the Old Testament books, they would be in different sections, and that's kind of how the Old Testament is put together as well. We'll talk more about that. So this week we were talking mostly about narrative, right? And we're looking at some of the historical books. So we're over in the second section here, which is where we're kind of focusing. But we'll move next week into the in prophets and wisdom literature. Yeah, that's what's next week. So that's coming up. But you're getting a handle on a little bit on what how the Bible fits together. But in some of the historical writings, in fact, we're going to turn and take a look tonight at a little bit of the life and story of King David. When you hear the name David, and again, this will depend a little bit on your background, what your Bible or church background is. When you think of King David, what do you think of? Anyone?
I hear David. I think David and Goliath. I'm going to be honest.
Good. That's a great thing because that's the same person, just at a different time in his life. He wasn't king at that time, but that is part of his backstory, isn't it? The story of the little Jewish boy who takes on the giant Philistine, and slays. Yeah. Good.
I just think of a musician because I believe I remember reading that.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't he a musician?
Yes, he was. That's good. That's good, Shannon. Yeah, he's known, and again, you'll read that if you read the stories of younger David in those historical books. But it plays out. The book of Psalms, many of the Psalms were written by David, and most of those were written originally to be put to music. So clearly, he had a musical background or a musical bent. But yeah, that doesn't really play into his being king. But you're right; that's a big piece of who he was.
I think of Psalms. I know you just said Psalms, but I was about to say that it was the book of Psalms. I normally kind of thumb through that Psalms when I need some encouragement.
Good. Yeah, most of those.
I think of David when he was younger, maybe a shepherd,
Mm-hmm.
a keeper of the sheep, a shepherd, humble, wise, the youngest, all the brothers.
Yeah, and that's
But the mightiest, he was the mightiest, huh?
He was, and that's what makes that whole story so interesting, though, isn't it? That he's not the one that anyone would have expected. He maybe wasn't the oldest, certainly. He was probably the biggest, or
but the robust,
the most obvious choice.
skinny little scrawny.
Yeah, skinny little scrawny kid who
Described him as scrawny.
out there, went to the front lines to bring a lunch for his brothers who were fighting, and
Right.
there he confronts the giant. But there's a lot of interesting backstory to the person of David who becomes king. And the reason I bring him up tonight is twofold. One, because he does become the most noteworthy probably personality after Moses. He's probably the most noteworthy personality in the Old Testament. Spends more time, the Bible has more time connected to him than almost anybody else. And that's partly because he was considered the great king, the great unifier of Israel. And so even hundreds of years later, when people thought back on the glory days of days past, he was always back in the good old days when David was king. And for us, it's hard to imagine being in a culture that is basically illiterate and doesn't have books available, the internet available. But how do you hold on to stories of what your nation, your culture, your history is about? Well, it's through these stories. And so David becomes kind of the icon, the king, the main dude. And then as it moves forward towards the New Testament, he's still that guy, because it is someone who is going to be a descendant of his that will ultimately, again, come to take up the throne and restore Israel, who would be their Messiah Redeemer. And so David really becomes a key player in the whole Bible story. I want to look tonight at a passage of scripture that comes out of 2 Samuel 11 and 12. And I'm going to put it on the screen so we can read it kind of together and just all stay on track with it. But I'll need some of you guys to kind of help me read through the story. as we look at David, but I want to look at it through these eyes, not just what's going on with David here, but what's going on with the Bible storyteller, the narrator of the story. What is he doing, and how does that reflect on what it means to be great? Again, David is, of all the kings, he is the great king. He is the probably of all the personalities, he is the epitome of what you really want to be. But David was flawed, like all people are. See, Melissa, your sister was right. You know, maybe nobody is great. If greatness equates to perfection. And I think that's something the Bible always avoids, because there's no perfect character other than Jesus in the Bible. And so as we're looking at all these great characters, whether it be Moses or David or whoever, the Bible is very clear to paint them with a realistic brush, that they are not perfect, they're not iconic, that we somehow can never live up to being like them. But we look for those personality traits or greatness traits, and those are things that we too can aspire to. So before we go to actually read it, let me see, I want to, and I'm not sure what I did. I just kind of went away from where I was. You still see me on your screen? Because I just somehow got lost here in my Zoom.
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, there we are. There I am. Okay. To share the screen, I want to go here and share this with all of us. Let's go to that one. And just before we start reading, I want to lift up some questions for us to listen in. And again, this is helping us with what we're going to call the literary world that that we're wrestling with. This is kind of a literary world example. When we look at this, we ask just some real basic questions. Who is telling the story? Because it doesn't identify the teller of the story, but we can talk about that in a moment. Notice when we read the story, how does the story begin and how does the story end? Because it kind of gives us, it does have a beginning, it does have an end, and so we kind of know what the story is, compact in that way, and we can kind of look for what the point of it is if we know where it begins and ends. Number 3, who are the characters? And this is always important when you're looking at a story, trying to identify what's going on. You want to talk about what are the characters. If you're watching a movie, you do the same thing. If you're reading a story in a book, you do the same thing. But oftentimes when we read the Bible, we think the Bible is somehow different, and so we don't ask them these basic questions. And then once you identify who the characters are, how does the person writing the book, the biblical writer or the narrator of the story, how does he develop them? Because how a person develops a character in a movie or in a book says a lot about what that character is going to do, or how they're going to be, what the point of the story is. And so we'll look at that. These are questions we'll ask a little later. Which characters do you find sympathetic? So as we read it, think, am I feeling sympathetic? Am I feeling drawn to this character? Or is this character kind of, making me mad? Because that's intentional. It's not just a story. He is telling you a story with a point. And I think it's important for us to remember, whenever we read narrative like this in the Bible narrator is giving us these for a reason, because he's trying to make a point with the story. Okay, one of the characters' name is Bathsheba, but notice as we read it, the other names that she is referred to by. Okay, and we'll talk at the end. What do you think? Why does she get the different renderings, not just her name? Yeah, most action or events that take a lot of time. If we hear repetitions, just be aware that that's part of what we're going to do. Okay, so I'm going to throw up on the screen the beginning of 2 Samuel 11. If you want to read in your big red Bible, that's fine. If you want to just read it from the screen, that also is fine. But as I do that, let me see. Where am I at? Okay, now I'm looking. Okay. Okay, that's not where I wanted to go. Okay, so let me stop that share. Sorry about that. I might have to go to the read our Bibles. Oh, here we go. This is what I'm looking for. I don't know how to get there. Okay. Plan B. Find your Bibles and turn to turn to 2 Samuel 11. And I would suggest that you go to the table of contents in the front and find the Old Testament. Find out where 2 Samuel is. It begins on page 453. Okay, that helps. And as we get there to 2 Samuel, we'll turn to the 11th chapter.
It's on page 467.
Very good. This is exactly where it is.
I just realized my name is spelled wrong. I don't have a D on my name. Oh gosh.
Oh yeah, Johnson. I've never seen that before. I see
Me.
I thought it was just D and then D at the end for DD. That's what I thought.
No, thank you for that. I just realized I spelled it wrong. I was on a Zoom meeting last night. My name was spelled wrong. How? Cheapers.
Okay. Oh, hey, look, I found it. I was able to do it. If you can't get to that page 467 real quick, here it is. And we're going to start here at chapter 11. Okay. And if you want to read it from your Bible, that's great. But again, we have the New Revised Standard Version here on the screen. So I need somebody who can read for me the first 5 verses, and they're right there on the screen in front of you. That's going to begin walking through, and again, listen for, how does it begin? Because we'll then compare it to how it ends. We'll talk about, are there characters who get introduced here? And a little bit of how's the story going to begin to play out. So who would be my first reader?
I can read.
Okay, well, don't fight over it. Just go ahead.
I think I got like lost a little bit of connection. My computer sounds like it's warming up. Okay.
We hear you.
Am I breaking? Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah, you're
Yeah,
not
we hear
breaking
you.
up. You're fine. You're fine.
Good.
Alrighty. So in the spring of the year, the time when kings go out to battle, David sent Joab with his officers and all Israel with him. They ravaged the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah, but David remained at Jerusalem. It happened late one afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about the woman.
Okay, hang on. You skipped over a line, and I think that's an important line for us. Maybe,
I did?
Maybe you're doing this to protect Bathsheba's reputation here, but don't worry about that. So once, on the roof.
Did I?
Yes.
I think you just cut out for a second.
Okay, it could be it.
Oh, okay. Yeah, my computer is making a weird noise. So I'll just go back to 2. It happened one late afternoon when David rose from his couch and was walking about on the roof of the king's house that he saw from the roof of a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful. David sent someone to inquire about the woman. It was reported, "This is Bathsheba, daughter of Eliam, the wife of Uriah the Hittite." I think that's how you pronounce that, right?
Hittite, but yes, you're very good. You're doing
Hittite.
great, by the way. You got
So
some tough
David
words.
sent messengers to get her, and she came to him, and he lay with her. Now she was purifying herself after her period.
That's interesting detail, huh?
The woman conceived, and she sent and told David, "I am pregnant."
Okay, stop there. Okay, we've got quite a story going on here. Scandal has begun.
Yeah. The whole neighborhood's going to be talking about him.
Oh my! Oh yes, absolutely. We got a problem on our hands. Okay, so first off, before we go on, who's telling the story?
Narrator's telling the story.
Okay, very good. We don't know his name. It is the narrator. He's setting the course. And again, it's the narrator who sets the perspective for us to see and to understand how these events, what they have meaning, and what does it mean. So story begins in the spring of the year when kings go out to do battle. And there's a specific battle they're heading out to. They're going out to deal with this group of people called the Ammonites. And they're going to besiege a certain city called Rabbah. But David doesn't go himself, does he? He sends somebody else out. His name is Joab. And so the army goes out, but David remains. This is already setting up a stage for something that's going to be out of place. If you were putting movie music to this, you would have some kind of minor keys being played. It would you want you to feel a little awkward. Something to miss. This is the time when you would expect David to be out leading his troops, and he's not. And because he's not doing what he ought to be doing, something else is going to happen. So we begin to see some of the characters already. We see David, we see Joab, and now we've been introduced to Bathsheba. So, okay, let's continue on though. We want to ask more questions of this as we read along. So verses, let me see, we want to go through 6 and down into 13. So who would be willing to read that for us?
I'll go since I'm already unmuted.
I'll read it.
Okay, go ahead, Daddy.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No,
I'll
go ahead.
prefer.
Ms. Johnson, would you please read that, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So David sent word to Joab, send me Uriah the Hittite. And Joab sent Uriah to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked how Joab and the people fared and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, go down to your house and wash your feet. Uriah went out to the king's house, and there followed him a present from the king. But Uriah slept at the entrance of the king's house with all the servants of his lord, and did not go down to his house. When they told David Uriah did not go to his house, David said to Uriah, you have just come from a journey. Why did you not go home to your house? Uriah said to David, the ark in Israel and Judah remain in booths, and my lord Joab and the servant of my lord are camping in the open field. Shall I then go to my house to eat and drink and to lie with my wife as you live? And as your soul lives, I will not do such a thing. Then David said to Uriah, remain here today also and tomorrow, and I will send you back. So Uriah remained in Jerusalem that day. On the next day, David invited him to eat and to drink in his presence and made him drunk. And in the evening, he went out to lie on his couch with the servant of his Lord, but he did not go down to his house.
Okay, thank you, Dee Dee. Now, again, do you hear the what's going on? I think many of you already kind of know the story, but if this is a new story to you, again, David, to understand the context, David is the ultimate great person of the Old Testament. And yet we're seeing there's something going on here that is certainly out of order, certainly amiss. And this Uriah, who he's having conversation with, is a new character now that we've been introduced to. So we've got Joab, we've got Uriah, Bathsheba, and David as our main characters here so far. There'll be one more we'll get to know a little bit later, but right now let's focus on this David and Uriah relationship. So a new reader, if you take us from verse 14 down to verse 21.
I can read.
Okay, please.
Sorry, guys, if I mispronounced.
Right.
In the morning, David wrote a letter to Jacob and sent it by the hand of Uriah. In the letter he wrote, set Uriah in the forefront of the hardest fighting, and then draw back from him, so that he may be struck down and die. Ooh, that's not nice.
That
As
was
Joab,
amazing.
yeah, as Joab was besieging,
Yeah.
thank you, the
Attacking.
city. The city, he assigned Uriah to the place where he knew there were violent warriors. The men of the city came out and fought with Jacob, and some of the servants of David among the people fell. Uriah the Hittite was killed as well. Then Jacob sent and told David all the news about the fighting. And he instructed the messenger, when you have finished telling the king all the news about the fighting, then if the king's anger rises, and if he says to you, why did you go so near the city to fight? Did you not know that they would shoot from the wall? Who killed Ambalaj?
Yeah. Close
son
enough.
of
Go on.
son of Jerubbaal? Did not a woman throw an upper milestone on him from the wall, so that he died at Thebes?
Close enough.
Why did you go so near the wall? Then you shall say, your servant Uriah the Hittite is dead too.
Good. Okay. So here we have the plan that Joab is telling the messenger to go and instruct and tell David what's gone on at the war because of the plan that
A scandalous plan.
that David hatched and sent to Joab, which was to have Uriah killed. Now, again, typical of Old Testament narrative, as they tell these stories, they fill them with all kinds of little details and facts that may not make any sense at all to you or I, because we're not familiar with the history, the culture, the places, or even significant things. For example, in this story, that whole, the king is probably going to tell you, didn't you know that, at Thebez a long time ago, Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, was killed? Of course, and you're saying, why am I reading this? I don't know who these people are, or what the story's about. But the story was important at that time, that there was, maybe some old tale that was told that about the warrior who got too close to the wall, and some old woman up along the wall threw something on him and killed him. So that becomes a warning, don't do that. It's really not part of our story so much as it kind of grounds the story in the reality. This is kind of what, this was part of the narrative at that time. Melissa, your daughter's so cute.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. But we see that the story is being hatched, and this is the first telling. We'll see it a couple times that we kind of hear this, and we kind of get in pause cycle here for a moment as we read through the story. And again, for us, 3,000 years later, and not used to what it meant to have a mostly oral tradition going around, we don't understand some of why this repetition happened, but we'll see that it does happen. So this is the plan to tell David that his plan has come to fruition, and he's been successful in getting rid of Uriah. But now I need another reader who will take us through from 22 down to 27.
I'll go. So the messenger went and came and told David all that Joab had sent to him to tell. The messenger said to David, the men gained an advantage over us and came out against us in the field, but we drove them back to the entrance of the gate. Then the archers shot at your servant from the wall. Some of the king's servants are dead, and your servants, you can hear me, servants, Uriah and Hittites is dead also. David said to the messenger, thus you shall say to Joab, do not let this matter trouble you? For the sword devours now one and now another. Press your attack on the city and overthrow it, and encourage him. When the wife of Uran heard that her husband was dead, she made lamentation for him. When the mourning was over, David sent and brought her to his house, and she became his wife and bore him a son. But the thing that David had done displeased the Lord, and the Lord sent Nathan to David.
Good. Okay, stop there. Thank you. So again, so we see the story has now transpired. She knows about it, and problem solved, right? Bathsheba is pregnant, clearly not by Uriah, because Uriah was never with her during the time when she became pregnant. So now Uriah has been rubbed out. Unfortunate loss in battle can be explained away. And David, the hero of Israel, does a heroic thing and takes this poor grieving woman who has now lost her husband and is great with child and has no means of supporting herself, and he does the gracious, compassionate thing by accepting her into his home, giving her the status of being his wife, and all is well, right? Isn't that where that story, all is well that ends well, comes from? Except that's not how the biblical writer tells the story. There's more to the story than that. So we get to be introduced to one more character, and then we'll kind of wrap this up. We won't go too much further and get the whole thing, but I do want to kind of catch how the narrator brings our story to a conclusion. Then I'll wrap it up here. So the Lord sent Nathan to David, and he came to him and said to him, he tells him a parable. So the prophet comes to the king and begins to speak of a story. Who would read this part for me? This is going to take us on down through, down through 15.
So all of 12 down to 1 through 15?
Yes.
Okay, I can read that.
Thank you.
And the Lord sent Nathan to David. He came to him and said to him, there were two men in a certain city, the one rich and the other poor. The rich man had very many flocks and herds, but the poor man had nothing but one little ewe lamb, which he had bought. He brought it up, and it grew up with him and with his children. It used to eat of his meager fare, and drink from his cup, and lie in his bosom, and it was like a daughter to him. Now there came a traveler to the rich man, and he was loath to take one of his own flock or herd to prepare for the wayfarer who had come to him. But he took the poor man's lamb and prepared that for the guests who had come to him. Then David's anger was greatly kindled against the man. He said to Nathan, as the Lord lives, the man who has done this deserves to die. He shall restore the lamb fourfold because he did this thing, and because he had no pity. Nathan said to David, you are the man. Thus says the Lord, the God of Israel, I anointed you king over Israel, and I rescued you from the hand of Saul. I gave you your master's house and your master's wives into your bosom, and gave you the house of Israel and of Judah. And if that had been too little, I would have added as much more. Why have you despised the word of the Lord, to do what is evil in his sight? You have struck down Uriah the Hittite with the sword, and have taken his wife to be your wife, and have killed him with the sword of the Ammonites. Now, therefore, the sword shall never depart from your house, for you have despised me, and have taken the wife of Uriah the Hittite to be your wife. Thus says the Lord, I will raise up trouble against you from within your own house, and I will take your wives before your eyes, and give them to your neighbor, and he shall lie with your wives in the sight of this very sun. For you did it secretly, but I will do this thing before all Israel, and before the sun. David said to Nathan, I have sinned against the Lord. Nathan said to David, now the Lord has put away your sin, you shall not die. Nevertheless, I lost my spot.
That's okay.
Nevertheless, because by this deed you have utterly scorned the Lord, the child that is born to you shall die. Then Nathan went to his house.
Okay. Yeah, it gets pretty rough there. It's a rough story. Interesting that Nathan comes in. Nathan plays the role of the prophet, and again, this is, I think, helpful for us, especially as we get ready to move into the talk about prophets next week. That you see, this is a good example of what a prophet does. He doesn't come and talk about future events, although there is some future telling what God sees coming down the road. But primarily what he does is to call Israel, and in this situation, he calls the king to account. You know, this is where you've gone astray. So the role of the prophet is to say, turn around and get your act together. So we've got a new character here, and we see that the story kind of does come to a conclusion. The next half a chapter or so is where the story concludes. So let me just touch on how it goes. Bathsheba does give birth to this child, but the child dies. As it's dying, David is praying for it. Finally, the child dies, and David grieves but moves forward. There's a kind of an odd thing where it mentions that Bathsheba now is David's wife, bears him another son. And it's hard to tell if the narrator is trying to say this is in the same time frame or if this is just later, and this son's name will be Solomon. He plays a role later on. And then it flips back to the story that we begun with, that Joab is in the field fighting this war against the Ammonites. And he comes back to David and says, hey, you know, we've been out fighting, you haven't. So we're about ready to take the city. If you want the glory for taking the city, you better come now. So David does. They win. They return to Jerusalem. He is now leading his army, and he is victorious. But in the middle of the story, so that's how it begins. They're going to battle. In the end, they're coming back from battle. But the story is not at all about the battle, is it? It's a story that gives us a chance to look at some of the characters and the characteristics of what it means to be great. Again, David is lifted up as this one great leader of the people, and yet he clearly is not being lifted up as great in this story. So some of the questions we started off with before we jumped into it. Who are the characters? We mentioned them already. There's David, there's Bathsheba, there's Joab, there's Uriah, and there's Nathan, yes? But which characters, as you heard it read, and maybe this will be a hard question just so you've heard it only the one time, which characters do you think got the best treatment? They're developed the most in the story. Because again, the narrator is making a point in who he develops and for what reason is going to be helpful to us to understand what the point is.
Well, I feel like it's the development of David's character, right? He's a king. He already has many wives. He already has all this stuff. And then he steals another man's wife, makes her pregnant. He tries to get her to get him to sleep with her. Come home from war, sleep with your wife so I don't have to carry this burden on my heart. Yep. And then he kills him because he won't sleep with his wife because he's a good soldier and he's dedicated to his king. And so I feel like it's the development of like David's character and how far he was willing to go to make things right in everybody's eyes, but God's eyes, right?
Right. Good. Yeah. So yeah, clearly. So this is about David, because again, of all the 5 characters, he gets far more treatment as far as developing. We get to understand. We get into his head a little bit. We understand kind of what his motives are, whether it's spoken or we can just see in his actions. We understand his motives. There's another character that not nearly as much as David, but still stands out above the rest. Who would that other character be?
Is it Uriah?
Yeah, it's Uriah, isn't it? We don't know much about Joab. I mean, he's a general. He's out fighting the fight. And he's following orders. We don't know too much about Nathan. He just comes and, speaks on behalf of God and goes back home. But Uriah, we get into the head. Oh, it's not Bathsheba. what do we know about what she's thinking?
She's like, God, how am I gonna cover this up?
But we don't even know that. I mean, she, you know, we don't get into her brain space at all.
Right.
But Uriah, we do. There's a little bit of a comparison, maybe, or a little bit of a contrast, I should probably say, that Uriah plays the counterpoint to David's personality. So if all those things, Melissa, you said were true about David, well, how would we describe Uriah from this story?
I would describe Uriah as faithful and honest. It says that he says, how can I go home and eat good food and lay in bed with my wife when all these men that I've stood next to in the battlefield are over here in tents around fire pits, or, you know, like I have to be with them because it's just not right for me to be on the same level as them and have the luxury of coming home and all this.
Yeah.
So it really counts to his character of how he's dedicated and strong and you know, faithful to not only, you know, I mean, he's faithful to his wife, but we don't really know that. But I mean, he's faithful to these people that he spends his life with, fighting on the field, and what do they call that? Camaraderie, or
yeah, the camaraderie. Yeah, of his fellow soldiers. Yeah, you see a loyalty in him. You see that faithfulness, as you say. You know, there is a trueness or a rightness or an honesty with him that just seems to bleed through in everything he says and he does, doesn't he? I mean, every time you give him a chance to go and sleep with his wife, and he doesn't want to take you right. He doesn't want to set himself up to get some special treatment. He gets plied with wine, and he still is a man of his integrity.
He carries his own death note and doesn't even open it on the way to see what it says.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, what a tragic story. But again, he really is lifted up as probably the polar extreme of David in the story, because David does all the opposite. He is not loyal to his people. He's not faithful to his vows as king or to his wives already. He doesn't trade in honesty. Everything he does is deceptive. And it comes out in the end. But at the time, he thinks that he's using his power to cover his lies. And you see that at every point, there are two opposites here. There's David and there's Uriah. And at every turn, the definition of greatness would be the characteristic you see in the underdog of the story. Again, not unlike much of the Bible. Oftentimes the Bible takes the underdog's perspective and says it's not the mighty that you expect. It is the underdog often that God's going to use to do what he's doing. But he does that here with Uriah as well. Yeah, Bathsheba, we don't know much about Bathsheba. She doesn't get really addressed at this point, at least, in understanding what's happening with her. And I think you could even make an argument, because sometimes we read the story today and we say, well, you know, it takes two to tango. And yeah, David was a bad actor, but Bathsheba went along with it. Or even I've heard people say, well, Bathsheba is really the problem. She should have known the king could see her bathing area, and yet she should have covered up instead of, you know, sunbathing with no clothes on or whatever.
He shouldn't have been looking.
Yeah, well, right, and he shouldn't have been looking. That's right.
But on a historical level, you have to kind of take into account that women weren't held as highly in communities as men were. So, I mean, does her story matter?
He had enough women.
Yeah.
But you get what I mean, right? Like women were not like as powerful as men were, and the whole, you know, before women rights movement. So I mean, like, there's not much mention of her because was it really significant? I mean, to the point where it would have changed the story of the Bible, you know, or changed the story of David's mistrust or like what he did, you know?
No, it doesn't. I think you're right, not just historically, but I think you can even read it from a literary world point of view as you read this story. The narrator doesn't develop her character or her agency in this at all. And so is that because he doesn't want us even looking that way? Probably so. You know, who is the actor? It's David. For us to say, well, there's shared blame, well, that's not what the narrator is trying to say, is it? Because he doesn't go down that road of saying what she did or what she thought or what part she played in this. We can fill that in, but he doesn't. And the fact that he uses, what were the different names? Did you catch that? The different names that Bathsheba went by in the story?
Well, in the end, she was called her Uriah's wife,
Okay.
but we
good.
didn't know that in the beginning. They don't make no mention to it in the beginning.
I think they do. I think actually that's
Do
how
they?
it's introduced. Yeah, I think. See, I went and shut my Bible. I shouldn't have done that. Now I'm working off memory, and that's dangerous.
I want to piggyback on something that Melissa said.
Yeah.
Women at that time, were not really considered, but it doesn't say maybe he was the king. Maybe we don't know. Maybe she felt obligated that she had to go.
Oh, it did say that
Well,
he was the wife.
You're right, and we don't live in a
We don't
world
know.
quite like that. But what would it mean for her to say no to the king? Would that be a death sentence of her own?
Right. Never.
I don't know. Yeah, and
It
probably
does
so.
introduce her as a wife, as the wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah, wife
This is Bathsheba, daughter of so and so, the wife of Uriah. Yeah.
Yeah, so all along she's either referred to as somebody's wife or somebody's daughter. And again, I think in the way that not every woman in every story in the Bible gets introduced that way, but it's interesting that Bathsheba in this story is treated that way. And it almost, to me, says she's not a player. I mean, she is in the story, but she is not making any of the decisions. She is not even a person in her own right completely. She is somebody's wife, somebody's daughter. She becomes somebody's mistress, and she's just kind of almost along for the ride. And I don't mean that in a way of disparaging her. I mean that in a way that says that the narrator is trying to not let us get distracted by thinking about what her part was, because that's not important. And by not lifting her up or telling us what she was thinking or her decisions or how they played in, by not even giving her the status of having her own name that wasn't tied to David or Uriah or her dad Eliam, it says that she's really kind of being almost taken advantage of in this situation, and she needs to be seen as victim here, not as part of the perpetrator. Even though you or I could say, well, when someone commits adultery, there usually takes two parties to be involved in that. In this story, the narrator doesn't want us going down that track. And even if you could take it and look at it from a historical point of view, and you would have evidence of that as well. But even from the literary point of view, just the way he writes it and the way he kind of sets the stage and develops the characters, he's giving you kind of little extra insights just because that's how the story gets played out. Okay. Who did you find most sympathetic in the story? If you were just look at it and say, these are the characters, and again, this is going to be telling to us in combination with something we've already talked about. Who is the most sympathetic character? Someone that you empathize with or are rooting for?
Character that we're rooting for?
Yeah, or who do you sympathize most with in the story? Who is most appealing to you in the story?
I think Uriah.
I think you're right. I think it is Uriah.
I think it's because his faith in people and his faith in his wife and his king and his dedication and all along, he just kind of had all this faith in everybody that everything was going to be good. And he kind of got really, kind of almost literally stabbed in the back.
Yeah, but it was in the front. But yes, he was. Yeah. Yeah, and I think, and again, that goes to, and I think that's an important piece as you're reading, especially in biblical narrative. Look, who is it that the narrator wants you to either associate with or be drawn to? Because I think everyone who reads this is kind of appalled with David, kind of put off by David, but yet we're drawn to Uriah. Sometimes people say, well, I feel sorry for Bathsheba, but again, that's not part of that's the story in our mind. It's not really the story that we read, because we don't have any way of really knowing what's going on for her. But Uriah is the one that we are drawn to. That says, now there's someone I wish I knew. There's someone who I wish I could be, or people around me would be more like Uriah. And so again, that's what I think gives us this idea. This is a contrast of good characteristics versus bad characteristics. Surprisingly, it's not David who is the example, but he's the antithesis, and Uriah becomes the example of what biblical greatness looks like. If we had time, or if we were meeting together, we would talk about a little bit about what Jesus said about greatness. I know you'll read some of that again in both Grimsrud and also in the Craybill book this week. And so just pay attention to that. This is an example that passage in Deuteronomy says this is what a great king should be like, even though kings didn't act that way. This story is, I think, a beautiful story of showing that though he's not the famous one, the example, the exemplar is Uriah. And for all those things that, for example, Melissa, you pointed out that were part of his character that we see, those become the examples of what greatness is kind of depicted. So again, it's interesting then when the New Testament, when Jesus talks about greatness, then he talks about being humble like this child, or whatever, however he tends to reference what it means to be great. It often isn't exactly in the way that the world expects to be great. To be great in the world's eyes might be because you have power or prestige or position. Maybe it's because you've achieved things or you've accumulated things. But again, biblically, both Old Testament as well as New, we see that these are the characteristics that the Bible wants to put forth. And we see it kind of running through this thread of the stories, the narratives of the Old Testament. So I'll leave it there for that. But okay, do we have questions either about this particular passage or lesson, or anything else in particular about wrapping up this week, week 3 that we're in, about greatness?
I thought the story was told pretty good. I never had read it in the Bible, but when I read, sorry, my daughter's getting nice. When I read Stuart or Fee and Stewart's version of the story, they really laid down like a foundation of what was really going on. And I think now reading that and then reading it in the story in the book with you, it really accounted to the characters of the people, the characteristics of the people more. I really enjoyed you going over that for us, because in the book I kind of got they kind of tell the story in a different way, like in a firm, like this is what happened kind of way. And then if I would have read this story in the Bible, I wouldn't even have really considered how bad it was. To be honest.
Yeah, you just go over things sometimes. I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but again, I think, and that's part of the challenge of reading the Bible, is sometimes I think the narrator wants to shock you a little bit. But sometimes because maybe we've heard it before, or maybe it's just not as shocking to us as it was back in those days. But I think this story is intended, and at every point, the whole thing, oh my gosh, what's David doing? Why is he not going out to battle? Oh my gosh, what's David doing? He's sending a message to have some of his soldiers killed. Oh my gosh, Uriah is dead, and David, our hero, is the one who ordered his death. How how can I believe in this human leader if that's the kind of character he demonstrates? And then,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, here's Nathan, calling him down. David, you are the man, that rich man that took the ewe lamb away from the poor man, you're him. And you just said that he deserves to die, you do. And all of a sudden now we're shocked again. Wow, this stuff is serious business. And so it kind of comes through. But a lot of times, again, we read it and we just kind of read it for the story that it is, and we don't catch some of what's intended to be kind of shocking in a way that helps instruct us. Because that's what those narratives are to do. They're stories that are told, historic stories, but they also are stories with a point. Sometimes the point is not so obvious, but the point is there. The narrator wants us to catch it. Well, okay. Well, I want to thank all of you guys for coming on and being a part of tonight. Thank you for all my readers. You guys did a great job. And I'll stop that share so I can see you all again. If you have questions or anything, shoot me emails. I have been enjoying your work, and I'll look forward to doing some more grading and reading through, but keep up the good work this week. If there's anything else y'all need or anything you guys want to have prayer for, but you didn't say it tonight, again, shoot me an email. I'll put it on my list and we can pray about it next week. Or if it's something that you don't want to share with the whole class, but you would like prayer for, just let me know that too, and I'll just kind of keep it on my list.